All right, let's dive right into this explainer on the 1947 Partition of India. We're going to unpack this monumental event by tracking the really dramatic political evolution of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. Because, the story of the partition doesn't just start on some sweltering afternoon in 1947 when a line got drawn on a map. No, its roots go back decades, stretching thousands of miles away to the streets of London, where a young Indian lawyer was trying to figure out his political identity. And honestly, the sheer historical irony here is wild. The man who ultimately founded Pakistan, a whole nation literally built on the idea of religious separation, was actually once celebrated for his fierce secularism and his absolute dedication to unity. When Jinnah came back to India from London in 1886, he was a staunch member of the Indian National Congress. His patriotism was so bulletproof that heavy hitters like Sarojini Naidu actually gave him this exact title. So, Part 1. The Ambassador of Unity. Now, in his early days, Jinnah was this highly successful London-educated lawyer who completely opposed communal politics. He was all about a unified India, and he definitely preferred constitutional debates over religious rhetoric. But here's the thing. The British divide and rule playbook was already planting seeds of separation way before Jinnah ever jumped on board. The British figured out pretty quickly that to keep their grip on India, they had to crack that massive Hindu-Muslim unity. First, you've got Lord Curzon partitioning Bengal in 1905, literally splitting it right down Hindu and Muslim lines. Then, in 1906, they kind of nudged the creation of the Muslim League just to act as a buffer against the Congress. And by 1909, they rolled out separate electorates, meaning Muslims could only vote for Muslim candidates. So the walls of us versus them were already being built while Jinnah was out there still fighting for unity. Moving on to Part 2, Clash of Political Styles. Everything really shifted on the subcontinent when Mahatma Gandhi came back from South Africa in 1915. And man, did this spark a massive clash of styles. Picture this. You've got Jinnah, who totally believed in orderly, by-the-book legal arguments. He's the guy for boardroom politics, law books, and impeccably tailored suits. And then you have Gandhi, right? He takes the independence movement straight to the dusty streets, using mass crowd mobilization, religious symbolism, and wearing simple homespun clothes. It wasn't just a fashion contrast. It was a completely fundamental disagreement on how you actually run a political movement. So the big takeaway here is that Jinnah was genuinely terrified of mob rule, and that's what pushed him to walk away. When Gandhi took the non-cooperation movement and merged it with the Khilafat movement, which was a religiously driven pan-Islamic campaign, Jinnah was seriously alarmed. He basically thought, look, taking politics to the streets with all this religious fervor isn't going to lead to democracy. It's going to lead straight to anarchy. Feeling totally sidelined by Gandhi's skyrocketing popularity and this completely new style of politics, Jinnah just resigned from Congress in 1920 and packed up for a temporary political exile in London. Which brings us to Part 3, the two-nation theory. Let's jump ahead to the 1930s to see how this all brews into one of the biggest ideological pivots in modern history. So, Jinnah eventually gets talked into coming back to India to lead the Muslim League. But the political scene? Totally unrecognizable. And the absolute catalyst for his shift was pure political rejection. In the 1937 provincial elections, Congress won huge, while the Muslim League got crushed, even in Muslim-majority areas. Congress was kind of drunk on the victory and flat out refused to share power with the League, basically saying, we alone represent all Indians. For Jinnah, this wasn't just an insult, it was a terrifying preview. It totally convinced him that a unified, independent India would just mean a Hindu Raj, where Muslim voices and political power would be completely erased. And his response to that fear changes everything. He completely transforms from that secular, suit-wearing lawyer into the Quaid-e-Azam, the great leader. He fully adopts the two-nation theory, making the case that Hindus and Muslims aren't just people of different faiths, but entirely distinct, separate civilizations that just cannot live in one country. Armed with this theory, Jinnah officially demanded a separate state of Pakistan at the Lahore Resolution in March 1940. So the fight wasn't just about kicking the British out anymore. It was entirely about who actually gets to own the freedom once they're gone. Part 4. The Violent Tipping Point. Fast forward to the end of World War II. The British government, now led by Prime Minister Clement Attlee, is totally broke and absolutely desperate to get out of India. But the political gridlock between Jinnah and the Congress leaders, it had turned completely toxic. Piece by piece, the negotiations just fell apart. First, the British cabinet mission floats a power-sharing grouping plan to avoid partition. Both sides initially nod along, but then Jawaharlal Nehru gives a press conference hinting the plan could be changed later. Jinnah felt completely betrayed and just pulled his support. With the constitutional path basically a dead end, Jinnah calls for Direct Action Day on August 16, 1946, and the fallout was catastrophic. It sparked riots in Calcutta that left over 5,000 people dead in just 72 hours. And even when they tried to slap together an interim government to keep the peace, it was a total war zone. Liaquat Ali Khan, acting as finance minister, intentionally stalled Nehru's administration from the inside, literally blocking files and holding back funding. Which brings us to this incredibly grim realization from Sardar Patel. Seeing the government totally paralyzed and horrific bloodshed spilling out into the streets across the whole country, leaders like Patel and eventually a highly reluctant Gandhi realized partition was the only way out of a perpetual, brutal civil war. They essentially decided they had to amputate the decaying organ to save the rest of the body. Part 5. Drawing the Bloody Line. So, the decision is made. The final viceroy, Lord Mountbatten, arrives in Delhi, takes one look at the rapidly spreading communal violence, and just drastically bumps up the British departure date. From June 1948 all the way up to August 15, 1947. This sets the stage for an impossibly rushed division. 5 weeks. Just let that sink in. That is the shockingly short amount of time they gave Cyril Radcliffe to draw the new borders. Radcliffe was a British lawyer who had literally never stepped foot in India before. They basically locked him in a room with outdated maps and old census data, and he just drew a line dividing millions of people without ever seeing how his pen strokes were slashing right through people's farms and family courtyards. And you have to understand, they didn't just partition the land. They literally sliced the everyday administrative fabric of the country perfectly in half. I mean, they were dividing up office chairs, typewriters, even library dictionaries. Military regiments with a Muslim majority were sent to Pakistan, the rest stayed in India. It was this absurdly surgical yet deeply traumatic tearing apart of a whole society. Then, of course, came the money, the financial division. Jinnah demanded 75 crore rupees, that's a massive 750 million, from the treasury for Pakistan. The first 20 crore went through, but Sardar Patel actually wanted to freeze the remaining 55 crore because of security concerns. Believe it or not, it was only fully released after Gandhi threatened to fast to death, just to make sure Pakistan got its agreed-upon share and to try and prevent any future bitterness. Part 6. The Tragic Human Cost. Now, as incredibly chaotic as the political and financial splits were, they honestly pale in comparison to the absolute humanitarian nightmare that hit next. Just think about this for a second. Pakistan celebrated its existence on August 14th. India celebrated on the 15th. But the actual borders, the Radcliffe Line, wasn't announced until the 17th. Imagine partying for your hard-won freedom, only to wake up 48 hours later and realize your ancestral home is suddenly sitting in a foreign, hostile country. Neighbors became enemies literally overnight. It triggered pure, unadulterated panic. An estimated 1.5 crore people, 15 million, were violently uprooted. Families just bolted from their homes with whatever they could physically carry, instantly creating the largest mass migration in human history. And the human toll? Absolutely devastating. Somewhere between 10 and 20 lakh people, 1 to 2 million were killed in the horrifying violence that followed. People waiting at railway stations wouldn't see trains pulling up with passengers. They were receiving ghost trains filled entirely with casualties, often marked with horrific messages written in blood. The sheer brutality, especially what was inflicted on women, remains one of the darkest, most heartbreaking chapters in modern history. In the end, Jinnah did achieve his ultimate political goal. But the personal cost was massive. He was secretly suffering from tuberculosis, a diagnosis he hid from absolutely everyone. He knew for a fact that if the British or the Congress found out he was dying, they would just wait him out and the whole plan for Pakistan would die with him. He passed away on September 11th, 1948, barely a year after partition. And with his passing, that somewhat secular vision he had initially floated for the new nation quickly unraveled into years of deep political instability. So, as we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look past the political chess moves, the massive egos, and the constitutional debates. The legacy of 1947 leaves us with a truly harrowing lesson. When rigid ideologies clash, the lines drawn on a map might give politicians exactly what they ask for, but it's the unnamed millions who ultimately pay the price. It's definitely something to think about the next time we look at a world map. Thanks so much for joining me, and I'll catch you in